Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. I'm TCaptainX. If you're struggling to improve playing on mouse and keyboard in Call of Duty Warzone or Call of Duty multiplayer, then this video is for you. We're going to take an in-depth look at some of the top mouse and keyboard players in Call of Duty Warzone and look at their sensitivity in settings and then help determine what is best for you as an individual player. Then at the end, we're going to go over some proven practice methods to very quickly see drastic improvements in your aim that will translate into your gameplay. Now, before we jump into explaining sensitivity and whatnot, I want to make sure you guys have a good understanding of how sensitivity is calculated. There's two main factors. First, your DPI or dots per inch, and that is the sensitivity to your mouse itself outside of the game. And then second, of course, your in-game sensitivity that we would set in Call of Duty or any other game. And these two multiplied together equal our eDPI, which is our effective DPI. And this quick example here shows how you can have different DPIs and different game senses, but they would feel and play the exact same. So 1600 DPI times 2 cents would equal 3200 eDPI, or something on the other end, a low DPI with a higher in-game sense, 400 times 8, would also equal the exact same 3200 eDPI, and these would feel the exact same. But is there a best DPI? Doesn't matter. Well, there are several YouTube videos out there that suggest it does matter. So to get into your DPI, this depends on what type of mouse you're using. I'm using a Logitech G Pro X Superlight. If you have like a Steel Series, you're gonna have a Steel Series software. If you have Razer software. But myself, I'm gonna open my Logitech G Hub app in order to get into here. Now, quick note, if you're on console playing with a mouse, if you don't have a dedicated DPI button on the mouse, you probably need to connect your mouse to a laptop or another computer, download the software and set it in there, and then reconnect it to your console. So basically, some other YouTubers who are a lot smarter than me did some research, and they found that 1600 DPI and above had the least amount of latency to your mouse, or the least amount of input delay. So that is why I play on a DPI of 1600. Now, this change, I'm not going to say it's going to be some like drastic night and day difference. It's not going to make you into Shroud, but theoretically, if you want the lowest amount of latency possible, 1600 and above is where you want to be at. But just remember, back to this example, if you change your DPI, you need to change your in-game sense so it's the same. So now the question is there a best in-game sensitivity or best eDPI? And so what I did was I got 10 notable mouse and keyboard players in Warzone, some of the best. This is not like an exclusive list like my top 10 hardcore ranking, but some 10 very good players, and I gathered all their settings here and I put it in a nice little Excel sheet so we can look at it. So we have DPI in-game sense if they play with an ADS multiplier. So for example, Breadman plays with 0.85, so that means when he aims his gun in, his sensitivity slows down just slightly. It's 85% of what it normally would be when it's hip fire. And then I've converted those to what's called centimeters per 360. Essentially what centimeters by 360 means, it just means that if I were to take my mouse and move it horizontally, what would the distance be until I make a 360-degree turn? So if we were to measure on my mouse pad the distance I moved, that should be about 49 centimeters if I did it perfectly in a straight line. And the reason we use centimeters per 360 is just because it's like a universal language across games, because 1.77 in-game sense in Warzone is not the same as Fortnite or any other game, as these games have different engines and the sensitivity numbers are different. Now, if you want to calculate your centimeters yourself, go to mouse-sensitivity.com, scroll down here, input your game. So we've got Warzone 2 in here, put your sensitivity, we'll do myself, which is 1.77. Make sure your DPI is in, and then you also have to put in your FOV, and it should calculate your 360 distance right here, which mine is 48.9 centimeters, and we'll round it and call it 49 centimeters. So with all that in mind here, what I wanted to summarize here and look at is what's kind of the common sensitivity. And overall, what I've found looking at most players is 30 to 50 centimeters per 360 for your hip fire is kind of your sweet spot. There are, of course, outliers. You have like Metaphor, who plays at a faster sensitivity of 23. Strafe is a little bit faster at 28. Then there's Iceman Isaac, who plays at a much lower sensitivity of 60 centimeters. So if you're way outside of this range, I'm not telling you you need to change your sensitivity, but you might want to consider it if you feel like you're really struggling, if you feel like your aim is just nowhere where it needs to be. Now, one thing to factor into this though is how much room you have. As you can see on my hand cam, I have a huge desk. It goes way out here under my monitor. So I have unlimited room basically. But if you have a small area, you probably can't play on my sensitivity, and you probably need to play on a faster sensitivity, maybe somewhere in the range of like what Metaphor or Strafe plays at. Now, another interesting thing here is about half of these players play with an ADS multiplier of 1, meaning when they aim their gun, it should feel 1-to-1 and feel the same, and half play with a little bit lower. Breadman, Metaphor, Symphony all play just a little bit lower in the 0.8 region, but then Iron plays super low with a 0.59 ADS multiplier, making his ADS centimeters per 360 78 centimeters. So that's like, I don't even think you can do that in one arm swipe. So it's a super low sense when he aims his gun. Personally, I prefer an ADS multiplier of 1 because that is best in my opinion for muscle memory. Your sense is always the same whether you're hip firing or whether you're aiming your gun. So now let's go in game and actually discuss the rest of our in-game settings. So of course, going to settings, keyboard and mouse under the mouse tab here. So we already discussed sensitivity. Now under the show more, you can adjust things like your vehicle sensitivity, although personally I've left these alone. Previously, I would sometimes make my air vehicle sensitivity higher so it's a little bit easier to drive helicopters, and that's something you can do if you want to as well. Now again, ADS sense multiplier, we already discussed this, but sensitivity, transition, timing. You have 3 options here: instant, gradual, and after zoom. Essentially what this means is, now if you're on 1 like myself, it basically doesn't matter, but if you're other than 1, this does matter. What this would mean is if it was on instant, as soon as I right click and start to zoom my gun, if I have an ADS sensitivity multiplier other than 1, my sense would change right then. If I was on after zoom, it would not go into effect until the gun is fully zoomed in, and then gradual is an in-between where it kind of ramps up as your gun is zooming in. Personally, I think instant would be best because as soon as you're right clicking, your sense is changing. In a lot of these guns, they have, you know, pretty slow aim down sight speed in Warzone 2. So I think if you're making a flick as you're starting to aim, your ADS sense will go into effect right as you right click. Now you do have an option to set an ADS sense multiplier for focus. And what that means is when you hold your breath when you're sniping, you could change your sense for just that situation alone. So I could see maybe having it just a little bit lower so you can be more accurate to line up a long snipe. But personally, again, muscle memory, I think it's best, so I leave it 1-to-1. Now, ADS sensitivity type, relative or legacy. This is a confusing subject, and I'm going to do my best to explain it here for you guys. I will also point out that I actually do not know the exact difference from legacy MW to legacy Black Ops. But if you played with legacy on Warzone 1, you're going to want to use MW since MW was on the Warzone 1 engine. Now, I play with relative, and what relative tries to do is when you aim your gun in, watch the sides of the screen. See how the entire screen is zooming in, even though I have a 1x gun here. When I do that, my sensitivity is going to adjust based off this new zoom value, and it's going to try to make it feel 1-to-1 so that if I'm like this feels the same as me doing this, okay? Legacy, it does something similar, but it feels off to me. So legacy, when I zoom in, my sensitivity feels faster when I am zoom in, and it's even more noticeable with a higher zoom gun like a sniper optic. And they basically are just 2 different methods of trying to make your sense feel the same when you aim your gun in. But personally, relative to me feels more accurate and more 1-to-1. Now, if you play with relative, it is extremely important you have the correct monitor distant coefficient value, and for most of you guys it's going to be 1.78. So to figure this out, go to your graphic settings here, whatever your display resolution is, so the type of monitor you have. Most of you guys are probably 1920 by 1080. Myself, I'm 2560 by 1440. Both of those are a standard 16:9 aspect ratio, and if you take the big number divided by the little number, so the horizontal resolution divided by the vertical resolution, that's going to give you your monitor distant coefficient, which is 1.78 in all 3 of those examples. Now, if you're on like an ultra wide monitor, something different than your normal aspect ratio monitor, that's when you're going to have a different monitor distant coefficient. So again, take that horizontal and divide it by the vertical. Now, custom sensitivity per zoom, this is something I leave off again because I think it's bad for muscle memory, but you do have that option to go in and adjust some of those sensitivities based on how high level of a zoom you're using on your gun. Vertical aim axis, this is if you want to invert your up and down. So if we were to invert our aim on foot, I push up to go down and I pull down to go up. It's more like the airplane settings. Some people that are a little bit older, I think, prefer these because that's how games used to be. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to offend anyone. I'm kind of old myself, but But overall, only do that if that's just what you're used to playing. Third person ADS correction type has to do with third person mode only, which isn't even available in the game currently. Precision is supposed to just help with like recentering your aim when you aim in and out from third person. Mouse calibration, now this is important. Make sure everything in here is at 0 or off. Basically, this just adjusts our sensitivity, and it's gonna really hurt that one-to-one muscle memory feel. Mouse acceleration is something some people have played with. I know Strafe has played around with this. Basically, the faster you move your mouse, the faster your sensitivity becomes. And overall, this is really bad for muscle memory. It's cool for hitting some really fast flicks, but even he's played with it, and then he's later turned it off, I believe, overall. So moving over to the gameplay tab up top here. So crouch, prone behavior, and sprint. I like to have all of these on toggle. And what this means simply is when I hit my crouch button, it stays. If it was on hold, I'd have to continue holding my crouch button so that my guy would not uncrouch. If I let go, he would stand back up. Now, automatic sprint, this is kind of one that's up in the air, and a lot of people play differently, and it's kind of just personal preference. So if you were to put this to automatic sprint, that would make it so as soon as I hit W, my guy goes into a sprint. Then I would hit my next key, whatever my sprint key is, to go into a tactical sprint. Or you could also change it where it just goes straight into an auto tac sprint. So just a W key, straight into tac sprint. In Warzone 1, I played auto tac sprint. However, in Warzone 2, with the slower sprint to fire times, personally, I have liked to leave that off. However, my tactical sprint behavior, I have single tap run. And what that does is as soon as I hit my sprint key, which is my side button on my mouse, I instantly go into attack sprint. So for a lot of people, they like to use shift. I have a little bit abnormal keybinds, and I'll explain those later. But I like this because if I know someone's around this corner, I can slow down and walk easier and don't have to worry about being in a sprint to fire. Just since, you know, this game is a little bit more about holding angles, hitting your shots, and it's less about breaking cameras and having crazy movement. Now, the backpack thing isn't that important unless you're playing DMZ, since backpacks are no longer in Battle Royale. Basically, that means if you sprint, it's going to automatically close that backpack for you if it's on. Now, anything that is mantle related, in general, you want these off because it's going to make it less likely so you accidentally mantle something. So, for example, I have to go up here and jump and then hit jump again in order to mantle. And if I had that on, what it might do is if I just were to look at it, it would auto mantle. And you don't want that because let's say if I was jumping and I was trying to shoot someone over here, my guy might auto mantle on this when I don't want him to when I'm trying to shoot over this direction. Now, share, slide, and dive inputs. I highly recommend having this on independent. That way you can have your own buttons for sliding and diving. And I think this is very good because it's just a lot easier to control which one you want to do what. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. In the movement advanced settings tab here, we're going to go in here. Now, if you are playing with auto tac sprint, there is a way you can have a keybind to walk, and then you could set your walk speed. Now, it doesn't really matter for me that much in my opinion, and I like just to keep it on fast because then my guy's not auto tac sprinting and you don't have to deal with that sprint to fire time. Plunging underwater, plunge freely means you just have to look down and your guy's going to go down there easily. Sprinting door bash is just as long as you're sprinting and there's a door that's closed, you're going to open it when you run through it. If you turn it off, you have to actually go up and interact with the door in order to open it. So I think the sprinting on is best in general. Like I said earlier, all the mantle stuff, keep it off. And then for ledge hang mantle behavior, do mantle only. Now, mantle only will make it so you have to just double tap your jump. If you jump again, your guy will climb. But movement base, if you just keep holding the W key, your guy is automatically going to climb and mantle. And that might be a little bit faster, but I just find just spamming the jump bar is a little bit easier in my opinion. Now, back to the gameplay tab, scrolling down to combat behaviors here. So aim down sight behavior, I like this on hold. That means you have to hold it. When you let go of your right click, it's going to auto on ADS. And overall, that's generally what almost all players tend to play with. Focus behavior has to do with when you're holding your breath while sniping, and I like this on toggle personally, but this is personal preference. This means that you just have to hit your hold breath button once. Your guy's going to hold his breath until he runs out, and then he's going to sway and whatnot. But if you prefer, hold is fine as well. Interact behavior, definitely want to just leave this on press, as hold is just going to slow down everything you do. Weapon mount activation means you have a separate button or separate keybind in order to mount, and you could toggle it on and off, or you could set some of these other ones like double tap ADS or ADS melee. But for myself, it's my Z, so I just hit that and I can hit it on and off. And then I have it set so if I WASD any direction, it comes right off. Armor plate behavior, highly recommend having this on apply all. Makes putting on plates much faster in Warzone. Going to the combat advanced settings, I like the depleted ammo weapon switch off. This means when you automatically run out of ammo, your guy's not going to automatically switch his weapon, because there's a lot of times where I notice I'm out, I hit my weapon switch, and then I'm switching back to the other one because it already started to switch. So I don't like to do that. Weapon switch wraparound has to do if you use your scroll wheel to switch weapons. weapons. I don't, so this doesn't apply to me. The weapon mount movement exit is what I just talked about. If you hit WASD while mounted, your guy will unmount, and I definitely recommend having that on. Sprint, pause, reload. I like to have this on. That means if you start sprinting during a reload, your guy will cancel the reload and start going. However, remember in Call of Duty 2 Warzone 2 that there not really is a reload cancel, and you will sprint, but then when you stop, your guy will have to still finish the reload, which is annoying. Weapon mount exit delay, keep this as short. It just allows you to get unmounted a little bit quicker. Quick C4 detonation. I actually don't use C4, so I haven't really experienced this, to be honest, but this allows you to, if you press your lethal button again after throwing one, it'll detonate it. Whereas if you have 2 C4s, you would not be able to throw another one. So it's kind of weird. It's a little bit tricky, but I think you can also just double tap your interact button to blow them up as well. Manual fire behavior. Now this is an interesting one, and I want to discuss it here briefly. This has to do with like pistols or anything semi-auto. Normally press would mean it's like you have to click each time. You can change this to hold, and what this would do is you just hold it down and your guy's going to semi-auto his gun, but it will not shoot as quick as possible. So it will slow down the fire rate if you do it this way. It makes it easier to aim because you don't have to worry about clicking each time, and it's good for pistols sometimes, but you won't get as good of a fire rate. So I think press is best. Now back to the gameplay tab, scrolling down to vehicle behaviors here. All of these I have left alone here. I've not changed with any of these ones, and I believe all of these other settings we have left as default as well. All right, moving on to the keybind section. Now I just want to say before I start this, I have some very abnormal and different keybinds, but there's a reason for it. I don't do it just to be different. Having some of my keybinds in a different setup allows me to do other things much easier. So just going to explain that as we go here. Now my WASD is left default. My interact is X, and the reason it is X is because my prone is E, and this allows me to super easily drop shot or dive because that button is right there next to my WASD. Personally, I just like that. It's something I'm used to. The X is a little bit awkward, obviously, but think about it this way. Do you need to be able to dive and drop shot quicker, or do you need to be able to loot quicker? Looting obviously is important, but in general, you know, whatever you're doing in a fight needs to be quicker. That's why I like to have E as my prone. Now, of course, my jump is still spacebar. Talked about prone here. Change stance slide. You don't really need to mess with this because we're going to cover in other settings, essentially. I like my crouch and slide as shift. Control is popular for other people, or C is also another popular one, but I've always been comfortable with shift. Now, my sprint is my bottom mouse button on the side of my mouse. Again, it's a little bit different, but I also like that this is my focus button or my hold breath because it's very easy for me to tap that when I'm sniping so that I can get into that hold breath mode. For the movement advanced keybinds in here, there is an auto move forward button, so you can tap. For me, it's G. You can tap it and your guy will auto walk forward, which is nice. These you do not need to change as these are covered in other areas. This is how you give up here. Cut your parachute is your crouch button, and I think all those, these are kind of extra. Now back to the keybind tabs. Under the combat keybinds, of course, my fire is left click and aim down sight is right click. My reload is caps lock, and this is the one I get a lot of flack for, and people are like, why the heck do you do that? But it's because I use my next weapon or weapon switch as R, and this is just a lot quicker and easy for me to hit R than it is to hit the up and either scroll wheel, or to use, I think 1 or 2 is the default. And I just find it a lot easier to switch because, again, being able to switch your weapon fast is very important in Call of Duty. And whereas reloading, of course it's important, but getting a reload off 0.1 seconds before versus being able to switch your weapons, the switching weapon is a little bit more important in my opinion, and that's why I like to have that keybind easier to hit. But hitting caps lock is still very easily, as I'm just moving my pinky up from shift up to caps lock. Weapon mount, like I said earlier, is Z. My melee is F. My lethal equipment is the mouse, but the other mouse button. The reason I like this is it allows me to hold it and I can still move around and still have all my WASD functionality here, because if you were to use like E or F as your equipment, then you don't have full function of WASDing while you're holding that item. And then my tactical equipment is actually pressing my mouse scroll wheel button, and again, same idea. I am able to have full movement while I'm holding it, and I don't have to take my hands off WASD. Field upgrade is 3. My plate is 3. I think default is 4. I moved it over to 3 because it's just a little bit easier. Stowing an item is Alt. I hit over that with my thumb. For the combat advanced keybinds, I've left these alone, although I did move my fire mode over to N. And then all this stuff is just your kill streaks. I moved mine. I think the default is 3. I moved mine over to 2, so it's a little bit closer. Going back here, then to the vehicle keybinds. Now, there are a few ones in here I do recommend changing. I think the default handbrake is E, and the problem with this is, again, you can't WASD and hit E at the same time. So I moved it down to shift. That way you still have full access to WASD while you can drift. Next, see, I did add scroll wheel up and down because you can go up and forward instead of having to just only go next. And then another one that I changed that I find kind of important here is for the helicopters. Let me find it down here. For the helicopters, I think the default descend is E. Again, you can't WASD and hit E, so I changed the descend to shift. That way I have full control of WASD while descending. I also moved my flares over to right click because a lot of times you get in a helicopter and you accidentally hit flare on accident. So I feel like you're less likely to do it by moving it over there. And then back to the keybinds here and the overlays keybinds here. A lot of these I've left relatively the same. Scoreboard is tab. I do have a scoreboard for how many kills you have as 1 because this brings up the other scoreboard. So it's kind of confusing there. And then show map I do have as V. Now default is M. The reason I have it as V is it's just a lot easier for me to hit this while I'm moving if I need to check the map for ping pings or mini map pings or things like that instead of reaching all the way over to M. Now another one that I have that is different is my ping is Q, and what I really like about this is it makes it super easy for me to aim and I can ping at the same time, whereas the default ping is kind of harder to hit, and this way I'm able to get live pings on people very easily while I'm shooting at someone. And then going back here just to finish up keybinds, all these other menu things I've left alone. My push to talk is T, although I do have that on a foot pedal so I can hold my foot pedal, which is bound to T. Just makes it easier to use push to talk if you need to use it a lot. Now one last thing I wanted to cover in the in-game settings is graphic settings, and then go to view because I want to talk about our FOV or field of view. Now I do play on the maximum FOV of 120 and then affected, and this is what I highly recommend for basically everyone. However, the FOV, I think it's a good range between kind of like 110 to 120. Now I have an entire video where I go really in depth on this subject and talk about the pros and cons of lower to higher FOV, but I just wanted to share this that the majority of PC mouse keyboard players are usually on 120 affected. So now that we hopefully have a good foundation for our settings, our sensitivity, all that, what can we do to see really quick improvements, maybe get used to a new sense or just improve our aim in general? So if you own the Modern Warfare Multiplayer Edition, go into multiplayer here, go down to a private match. We're going to create a new private match, and overall I think free for all is going to work the best for doing this here. As far as your weapons goes, generally I like to just have 2 high damage per mag SMGs. So I've got the Minivac and the Hurricane because those have larger magazines here. So I've got those here, and then once this loads in here, going into game setup, go to shipment, since this is going to be our smallest map and we're going to be able to get the most action here. In our game rules, under game, you can adjust this however you prefer, but for the sake of this, we'll just go pretty high here. We'll go maybe 200 points with a max time limit. You can turn down your match start time so it's a little bit quicker. Under player max health, turn this all the way to 300, and then our health generation to fast. And what we're doing here is this is more health than Warzone, but it's going to force us to basically hit our shots a little bit more and force us to be more accurate. Then going to team here, the only thing you really need to change here if you want is you can make your radar always on, but that's completely up to you. Then going to gameplay, make sure your spawn ammo mags is on max. Also recommend turning kill streaks off so you don't have to worry about that. And then lastly, going into the bot setup, change this bot difficulty to recruit and put it on the max of 5. Unfortunately, the max is only 5, and then we're going to start the game. So with our custom loadout here, basically what I like to do when I'm playing mouse and keyboard is I like to go in and I like to kill maybe 50 bots. It doesn't have to be an insane amount, but being able to go in here, kill a few bots, and this is such a good way to warm up and get just a lot more repetitions than you're normally going to get in Warzone. You know, in Warzone, you might get 10 kills a game or something like that here. And here we can get 50 plus kills in a matter of a few minutes here, and it's just a great way to practice our aim. Now, like I said, I like to have that high damage per mag gun. That way I'm not worrying about reloading too much here, and just go around. You can work on movement here. You can work on hitting jump shots, things like that. But doing this on a daily basis, or at least as just a warm up for a few minutes before you jump on, will make a massive difference, especially in your close range aim. Now, if you want to work on long range aim or sniping, you can go into just a larger map. If you're going to work on sniping, make sure you don't put that health up too high so you can still one shot though. But overall, this is just my favorite method of practicing my aim. Now, I do want to briefly talk about aim training and using AimLab, which is a free game or free aim trainer that is available on Steam. I'm only going to cover this briefly as this probably needs an entire video to itself here, but the previous practice method that we talked about, it is great. It's really good for close range aiming and close range practice, and that tends to be a mouse and keyboard player's biggest weakness against a controller player, but that's really all we can practice, whereas in AimLab, you practice literally any possible situation. So if you're new to AimLab, make sure you're going into your settings settings, make sure you have it on the Call of Duty Warzone series and that you're putting in all your correct sensitivity. For your field of view, I recommend just sticking with 103 because remember, even though if you play on like a 120 FOV in game, remember that when we zoom our gun in, even on a 1x zoom, our FOV is going to change slightly, and 103 is just kind of like a good starting point overall. If you are playing with an ADS sense other than 1, make sure you're also going down here, changing this to relative, and then changing your ADS sense, your monitor distance coefficient, and all that stuff and whatnot. You also, if you select your mouse CPI as what your DPI is, so for mine is 1600, if you go to the bottom here, change your sense options to advanced, it will actually tell you what your centimeters per 360 is, just if you want to look at it that way as well. Now, what scenarios should you do? So one of my favorites and what I recommend focusing on the most is going to be tracking. So if you go to the training tab, go to tracking here, it's going to give you all the different tracking ones. My favorite tracking scenario in general is Sphere Track 90 or the regular Sphere Track because it is just such a good, simple, smooth tracking scenario. It focuses on smooth tracking more than reactive or fast tracking here. And this is my warm up every single day if I'm playing mouse and key. I do get on here and do a game or two of this, and my aim sucks. I'm trying to talk to you guys right now, but do this and I'll do just a few runs of this as kind of my warm up before I get into anything else. Now there's also some really good playlists. So if you go to the custom tab and go to playlist, I have a bunch that are saved, but you can search them down here. And my favorite are actually Strafe's playlist. Strafe has a bunch of different ones. So the ultimate smoothness routine and the beginner Warzone routine are phenomenal, especially for beginner to moderate level players. But I like to do this on a regular basis as well, simply because I think having that smooth aim is such an important foundation for getting better. Now, another one that is really good is just the RA times Strafe Warzone routine. That one's a little bit more of a kind of like full encompassing routine and it covers kind of all aspects. And then I'm also a huge fan of the Revisect benchmark. So if you're newer, definitely start with the RA easy benchmarks. But if you're a little bit more experienced, you can get into the RA medium benchmarks. Definitely recommend joining their Discord. They have a lot of great resources and aim training type stuff to really, identify what you're weak at and how to improve and whatnot. So that's going to wrap the video up, guys. I hope you found it helpful. Let me know if you want me to do a more dedicated aim training video, but I do have some previous aim training videos already on my channel from Warzone 1, but they will relate perfectly still to Warzone 2 if you want to check those out. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more Warzone content. Thanks for watching, guys, and I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day.